So what I would say is use your resources and be a resource.
Yes.
Use your resources and be a resource. Nobody is without knowledge of something.
Hello and welcome back, friends, to Ignite180 Podcast. I'm your host, Sharita Santiago. And again, thank you for joining us for our conversation. This is part 2 of Loss, Grief, and Transition. And again, I have here with me Miss Rosalind Price, who is the founder and CEO of R. Richard Price Consulting. She is a grief coach and a change strategist. Thank you so much again for joining us, Ms. Price. I'm excited to jump right back into our conversation on today.
Glad to be here with you in this space. Let's do it.
I'm
excited.
Well, let's go ahead and dive right in. The reason I want to have this, wanted to continue to have the conversation on grief, loss, and transition is not only in looking at what's happening in the world. If we reflect on things like COVID-19, where we would see the ticker on the television each and every single day rising and the numbers rising. I actually, Roz, had to turn it off.
Yeah.
During COVID, I could not stomach seeing those numbers rise each and every single day. And the idea that thinking about, not even for ourselves, we blissfully didn't lose anyone in our family to COVID, but looking at the idea that there were people who were not only grieving, but also could not attend a funeral service for their family in the traditional way that they would do it because of regulations in and around that. So just thinking about like the impact of loss and what it looks like. But more recently, what I have seen is what's happening in the media with our current political system, our current business systems, and what change and transition looks like. And this truly prompted a conversation where I wanted to kind of pull you in to help unpack what change and transition looks like beyond death. So when we think about the change and transition during the last segment, you mentioned that change and transition can come in other forms beyond death. So with career and thinking about divorce and the loss of a pet, loss of a child, maybe not even a child to death, but maybe a child to prison, or a child going away to college, like those sorts of major transitions. So I want to jump into this conversation and first dive into some news that I recently saw, that the government, our president, and this established organization that he has gone into the system, and they have terminated and since rehired 24,000 individuals from 18 different agencies. Now, before they were rehired, the one thing that I want to kind of talk about is for those individuals who had been working their good government jobs, working in those establishments for years, they did the right thing. They went to college, got their education, got a job, and they were set, like they were in position to potentially even retire. I want to talk to the identity that we get so attached to when we are holding roles in positions, and something that is so unexpected, like the loss of a job that you maybe held for 10, 15, 20 years, abruptly happens. What might the individual be experiencing, and what might the impact of that separation of identity have on them? If we could start there. That would be great.
Oh, great. So first I want to go back to the stats, right, that you talked about. But even before the stats, you talked about COVID-19,
Yeah.
and the shifts there, and then the shifts in our economy that happened, not just the death, but the shifts in the economy, folks' ability to connect, have community, and when there were losses through death, of being able to say that goodbye in a physical form. And then now you fast forward to here we are today with the shifts in the government and the choices and the swift and abrupt changes that have happened. So one thing I want to point out is, in our last segment, we talked about understanding the type of grief and naming it before we actually go into the solution of what can you do. You got to understand what's going on. So one thing is that, we went through this collective grief, as an entire country, as a world. And we know here in the States, we really suffered by way of how things were handled, right? And so there's that. And folks, then there was downstream impacts, not just the death of your loved one, but there were economic impacts. There was the disconnection to friends, family, loved ones. So then you have those that who really try to manage the health of their mental health. There was a spike in mental health crises. As a result of that, you're seeing the death, you're seeing the disconnection, people not able to get the type of support they needed physically, just the loss of not being able to get your hands on things for your vitality. So there's that. And that was traumatic.
Yes.
So it wasn't just a collective grief. We went through a traumatic grief. That was
Hmm.
trauma, something
Yes.
that was sudden, caused distress, and in some respects was not very human in the aspect of empathy for how it would impact people. Then you fast forward to today, the way in which the change in that's happening, right? So,
Hmm.
yes, people have been on their jobs for 25 years, however, and the way in which there was no preparedness, it just was let me snatch you out. And then the mental games that are being played, if we want to be very clear and very real about it. So, that in itself is another trauma. So when you think about that, the country has and even it is still recovering from COVID-19 and all of the cumulative loss there and the collective loss, and then we fast forward to this, where perhaps in between there was some sense of stability, but still transitions going on, and now we're here. We have been going through trauma over and over and over again.
And I want to ask you more specifically, because that's good. And we have been going through this trauma for the individual who just experienced this.
Mm-hmm.
And they are in that trauma. They're in the throes of this tug of war between my HR person said, don't write the letter, don't respond to the emails, then abruptly being let go from a job. What would you say to the individual who's questioning, who am I now? Like now in this identity piece, they're making a transition. I don't know where I'm going to go to work. This is all I know. This is what I've experienced. And they're begging the question in this shift of change, who am I now? What would you say to them?
Oh, I would actually flip it and ask them a question. I would go, who are you now? Who
Mm,
were you before? Who were you before? Who were you during? Who are you now? And I would expect and I would encourage them that parts of that answer should not change because that's the foundation of you should never change. I don't care what happens around you. The knowing of you should never change. Now,
yeah.
that's your primary identity, your authentic identity. Now, if they're questioning from a secondary, meaning like, who am I now with respect to the roles I play, like the status, my
Hmm.
job title, even the fact mom, dad, sister, brother, whatever you are, neighbor, you did all of these things in respect to the secondary identity. Who are you now? And what does that
Hmm.
mean to you? Now, the big question is that if your secondary identity changes or shifts by way of this, should that shake your primary foundation? And to me, I would say no.
Hmm.
Now, as far as giving them a tool, and if you feel lost, which is totally normal, having lots of empathy, because part of it is not just a comfort level of why folks were staying in their jobs. That was part of their strategy plan for their retirement and their longevity, for them to go on and do other things, whether that was to retire or maybe to take on some other types of career choices. And that was their bread and butter as far as to get them their money that they worked hard for. They weren't just sitting
Hmm.
back coasting. So my question would be then when that happens and it becomes out of your control, and as we know, some change you don't control and you cannot control. However, what you can control is your mindset, your reframing of it. And in addition to what skills did you bring to the table and what did you gain and gather while you were there? And is there an opportunity for you to take those skills and shift them into what makes sense for you, meaning dollars and cents, what makes sense for you logically as far as your peace of mind and moving forward for your family. The other thing is that through all of this, we've missed the theme of whether it's the need for community or the lack of. How do
Uh,
you partner with others that are possibly in the same situation or similar? And how can you guys build a network where you don't just support each other verbally, right? And with hugs
mhm.
and empathy and prayers, the praying hands. How do you support each other in a way where maybe you can build something perhaps together? May not be easy, but perhaps you can collaborate on something. So I'm saying all that to say that even in the situations where we feel like we don't have a choice, we actually do.
Yeah, I like that. I like the idea of when identity is questioned, who am I really? What's going on? I feel like I don't have control, empowering the individual to really feel like I am still in control. And this will not get the best of me. One thing that you shared was reframing. I
Mhm.
remember many, many years ago, we went through a major shift at a nonprofit I was working for. I was fairly young, but our director was terminated by the board, and the board came in to essentially begin to lay off people that they believed were non-essential, and they peeled away at this thing for a minute. And I remember reading the book Who Moved My Cheese. I read that book, and practically speaking, I'm telling you, it shifted the way I thought. Because here's the deal: in Who Moved My Cheese, it helped me to recognize, like, this ain't my stuff anyway, right? Like, this is not mine. These the any given day a budget can be cut, and someone can walk in and say, hey, I need you to get up and leave. And it was in that moment that I begun to do reframing about my life and the way that I saw what I was experiencing. And the one thing that I thought about with those individuals who were terminated and then later on rehired, the amount of space in between, and like the uncertainty that they may feel even in these next 3 or 4 years, that the experience that they'll feel over these years may be a bit uneasy. You gave some really great tidbits on what they should do to prepare along the way. What would you share with the listeners about reframing? Like, give us some more plain language, direct, nitty gritty on how they might reframe their thinking right now, even with being rehired in a government system, or let's say you weren't part of the government system, but you've lost your job. How might you reframe the way that you think about yourself in context to the rest of the world, and your professional career, your overall engagement to providing for yourself?
You mentioned, which I love, where you said it ain't my stuff anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when we think about change and life in general, so life in general, the only constant in life, whether it be people or things, is you.
Mm-hmm.
You are going to be the common denominator in every change and transition in your life. So there's that first
Mm-hmm.
thing. And in reframing, one of the things that you didn't call it this, was that you started to make conscious detachments, and then you started to create a space for yourself where you can make conscious attachments. What is it that I really, really control, and where do I have the power to control? And that's what I really attach myself to, right? As the grounding and the foundation. That I didn't really have any control over, that it was temporary at any given day. You started to shift your mind to say, okay, I need to consciously detach from this and not allow it to define me, which is not always easy. Again, saying to your listeners and anyone that's listening to this is that empathy, because I'm not saying that this should have happened. It should not have happened in the way that it did. However, it did happen, and where it seeks to bring you to a level of uncertainty, bring you to a level of chaos in your mind, bring you to a level of dependency on a system that is flawed in itself and that may not actually benefit you in the ways that you would have hoped or that it should. The
Mm-hmm.
person and the things that you depend on is and are those things that you own, which is yourself, right? And your ability to network. So, one of the things that I always say is, in that reframing, you have to make space for, while you're dealing with your emotions of uncertainty, anger, disappointment, frustration, as you should, and the negative or downstream impacts that may impact you negatively, there is a power component to it. You may not know it at the time, But when you face it and you allow space for that, that power component will download to you as far as where you need and where you can make your necessary shifts.
Excellent. I like that. And I want to follow up with what you just shared and dive deep on two very different topics. I want to first talk about things that go well beyond the control of um, what we might be able to reframe. So for example, in the midst or in the process of having the experience of the terminations, firing and rehiring, shifts in government, there have been talks about the impact of like disability being impact. Are people going to get their payments? Are people going to receive their social security benefits for those who are already retired? I want to shift the conversation to how change and transition has a direct impact on community and how our communities need to begin to really rethink about the way that we are connected to one another. When we think about change and transition, it's simple to talk about it ourselves, right? Like
Mhm.
we had a conversation offline or off air, talking about William Bridges. It's a theorist. He's a theorist who had a process, and he said, in order for there to be anything new, something old must die, change, be lost. And then in the middle, we're going through that grief. We're trying to understand what it is. But at the end of that is the transition point where we are moving into the new thing. When we think about the idea that we currently do have social security, we currently do have disability, but just like the threat of this individual, when we think about reshaping, reframing, remodeling, the evolution of a thing, like what we're seeing now, we have the current president in place doing some of these things, but if that behavior evolves, we might get something worse later on, down the line. What would you say to a body, a community of people? We have neighborhoods, blocks, cities, states, churches, communities of people who are forging together and figuring out how they're going to make things work. How might we begin to prepare and shift our thinking collectively to deal with change and transition when we're on the other side where something that we don't control has already happened?
Yeah, so it's the understanding first that understanding the systems in which you play in.
Mm,
And understanding what that how intelligent or not intelligent that system is. So if that system makes no recognition that whatever decisions it makes, it impacts individuals, and what individuals are impacted by, then therefore their families are impacted, then that means their communities are impacted, then that means your cities and your neighborhoods are impacted, and the world is impacted. So if that system in itself doesn't recognize that or doesn't give a hoot about it, you know you're in a flawed system. However, you and yourself are a system individually, and you can create your own systems. Now, what I'm saying to you is that I'm not saying it's easy. However, it
mhm.
goes back to the power thing. So, understanding the systems in which you work in, also understanding you're using the words identity, right? In the previous
Yeah.
conversations. I want to also tackle the word labels.
Mm,
Yes, we use labels for ourselves to identify ourselves. However, I want to empower us to think through it through this lens, and I'll give you an example. So, yes, I label myself for service for benefit of the services that I provide and what I do. I am a grief coach. I am a change strategist. However, I want to reframe it and say I know how to navigate grief in a healthy, holistic way. I
yeah.
know how to build a strategy of change that is effective and that is cognitive of the individuals and the systems in which those individuals work in. And so when I am able to rename that and relabel that, that already tells me this is the fiber of my being. So by way of my ability to do, who do I look for? Who is my village? Who is the person that can do the same thing or a comparable thing? Or how do we work together based off of what I can do, what you can do, Sharita, and then how we build
Mhm.
our communities? I think about what the mayor here in DC has done. So, okay, this happened at the federal level. Folks have lost their jobs. And then what she said is, let me pull my resources together at this local level and figure out how we can support these folks. I may not be able to control totally what they're doing in the federal, but I can support my people based off of the power and the strength and the abilities that I have and the network in which
Mhm.
I have. and they work together, build work fairs, job fairs, things of that nature to try to bring people together and to help them. Now, the other thing is that whenever there is change, right? And we talked
Yes.
about that. If you're breathing, you're evolving, or you should. You
Yes.
should be anticipating something's going to happen. It's not constant. In that, never get too comfortable.
Mm,
Build those skills, whatever that skill is, and then start to read. What do they call it, Sharita? Read the tea leaves.
yes.
Awareness is everything. Awareness is everything. It's not like, yes, we are shocked by the inhumane way in which this is being done, but we're not shocked in the sense of what is being done because we were made aware of it, even when it was
Mhm.
trying, if there was an attempt to be covert about it or to lie about it, but the information was there for us. So use that to your advantage. It is wrong, but yet use it to your advantage to say, okay, how do I counteract that? So when we
Yes.
go into change, it's not, when we say we surrender to it and we meet it, it doesn't mean we meet it in the sense where it controls us. We figure out what control we have, and then we try to shift the tide.
I like that. And I love understanding what's within your control. I think about the idea that, again, going back to who moved my cheese, I recognize that in that situation that I was in, I didn't have a savings. I didn't have the $1,000 that should have been sitting in the bank. I didn't have the retirement fund. I didn't have the things necessary. And I recognize that if they would have let me go when they let my colleagues go, I would have been in a world of trouble.
Yeah.
Um, how might you suggest that as we think about the reframing, coming together as a community, I even think about like understanding the systems by which we play in, right? So these some of the things that I'm talking about hasn't happened, and I'm going to get into even in thinking about technology and in the world of AI and how that might change and create a transition that's unexpected. I'm going to talk about that in a moment, but I really like to talk to the person who I say that I have I have education, skills and ability and life experiences. I've traveled around the world. I've seen a lot of things. I read uncommon papers and journals and research that tells us, at least gives me breadcrumbs for what we might anticipate. So I shift stocks around because of that, or
Mhm.
I look at certain news every day. I'm not looking at Real Housewives of Potomac or Atlanta. I'm not on the latest trend bus of this thing is happening or what are we doing? Where are our fans at? You know what I mean? Because some folks gonna where our fans at and fan themselves right into the disarray when these folks finish. I'm sorry. I'm not I'm not trying to throw shade at the fans, but we gonna line dance ourselves right up in the situation. What would you say to people who may not be what would you say that they need to start considering to prepare? Like, you and I have talked about considering finances, having something set aside, having money set aside, stocks, bonds, having your Roth, your IRA, life insurances. There are some who are not yet ready for change and transition due to lack of just general preparedness. And I don't mean emotional. I mean life preparedness. What advice would you offer the individual listening right now? What advice would you offer them in getting prepared?
Yeah. So there's different types of listeners, right? There is the one that wants to educate themselves. There is the
Mm-hmm.
one that wants to be educated, but they just don't know how. But they want it. They're ready for it. And then
Yes.
there's the ones that they know better, but they just it's not a priority. It's
Yeah.
not important to them. And then there are others who don't want to know, don't care, and much respect to every type of listener. So I
Mm-hmm.
typically talk to and I lean towards the ones who either know and they want to know more, or the ones who don't know but they know they need to know something, right? And I also talk to the ones who just don't have a clue, not because by any fault of their own, but it's their level of capacity, their level of exposure and light. And but they want it. So that's who I talk to. So I tend to not exhaust my efforts on somebody else that is kind of like you're talking to a brick wall. I'm sowing my seed on thorny ground. So it's no need for me to exhaust my effort there. But what I would say is that we continue to gloss over the fact that community is always what moves us forward. The individuals and the community is what always moves us forward. So what I don't know, my community should be able to support and provide that for me. And at the same time, I should be feeding something into my community. So in other
Mm-hmm.
words, you mentioned investments and things of that nature. So I have a financial advisor. She and I
Yeah.
work together all the time. We're putting something together where we're like, okay, you're talking to your network about finances and the shifts they need to happen. At the same time, she's like, but Rosalind, my people are also grieving. So how do I help them on the behavioral side? So we're pairing up and we're bringing something to her network. I say all of that to say that we don't always have to do something so formal. My community in
Mm-hmm.
itself, we have a WhatsApp chat, right? We have a lot of federal workers in my community who have lost their jobs. Guess what we're doing? We're in the WhatsApp chat going, okay, here's a link to a job. Here's a job opening. I'm even saying, hey, if you need to change something up, I have a financial advisor. We are feeding that in. And then on the flip side, everybody is using their strengths and their abilities and their experience to feed back into the community. So what I would say is use your resources and be a resource.
Yes. That's
Use your resources and
mhm.
be a resource. Nobody is without knowledge of something. I don't care who it is. I can even call my 12-year-old niece and ask her on technology, right? Because this is what they're learning. I might not be savvy, but Aunt Dee Dee is what she calls me for your listeners. Aunt Dee Dee is not going to sit here and say with AI that's happening and this young lady is becoming savvy on it. I'm not going to sit here and say, well, I'm going to continue to use my old Yahoo and whatever. I'm going to say this child knows. Let me tap into that so that I can continue to evolve as the world evolves.
Mm,
So
that's
use your
good. Yeah.
resources and be a resource. Then on the flip side, guess who's helping to pay for her to go to science technology camp? Aunt Dee Dee. I mean, that's
Yes.
how it works.
Mm-hmm. You.
Use your resources and be a resource. We are not powerless,
Mm-hmm.
and we do not come without innate wisdom. Where we've
Yes.
gotten is we've gotten comfortable,
Mm-hmm.
we've gotten complacent, and we've disconnected from each other. But that disconnection has come because we've disconnected from ourselves. So I go back again to saying, who are you?
Yes.
Because if I know
Absolutely.
who I am, then I'm able to recognize you. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm able to recognize my needs, your needs, and we're able to work together. And that becomes the permeating energy so that when things like this do happen, we're able to come together collectively and say, okay, not on our watch. And those things that we can't control, we can change the tide for ourselves.
Yes, this is good. I first of all, I love the grace you gave for the where the fans at first, because I know I'm gonna get beat up. and and the one thing I was thinking is I sound like the mom who's like, them spelling words, that dance, them bit you got the seniors in the living room practicing where my fans at. so, so I'm not trying to get beat up, but I want to transition to this last thought in and around change transition and just thinking about as we talked about AI. I think that was a really great segue because I've just recently done some training at a area high school where I was working with some teachers, some educators on showing them strategies in and around how to use generative AI and other artificial intelligence tools. But from a workforce development perspective, many years ago, I read a white paper from the White House that talked about there being multi-million dollar job losses as a result of, and not multi-million dollar, I'm sorry, I misspoke, multi-million losses of jobs, that there will be eliminated jobs as a result of automation, artificial intelligence, and a few things. So when I think about what I read in that paper, the timeline it gave was 2020 to 2030. And we're at the midpoint and we're already seeing that there's some shifts happening. I don't think it's a loss in opportunity. And I love what you shared about seeing opportunities. I believe that the shift is going to come not by way of just the loss of job, but the transition and having the capacity to see the opportunity and make the shift into a new role. When you think about change and transition, the behavioral mindsets for the individuals who are maybe in retail, maybe working careers that may not require high levels of skills that cannot be done by a bot or by AI. What advice would you give to them if you had to sit someone down and say, hey, look, this is an opportunity or a situation that's coming down the pike. We're eliminating 1,000 jobs in place of these things. You know, we had the protest here, right? As
Mm-hmm.
a result of that on the port, that they protested not to have robots come and take their port jobs. Because if you go do anything with Amazon, Amazon actually gives you a tour. And I don't want to be long winded with the question because I'm going to get back to the
Oh, you're
question. But
good.
Amazon gives you a tour. And I sent my team down once to do a tour of that location. And they said to me, it looked like the robots were doing the jobs and the people were there to support the bots. So when I thought about what was happening at the ports and everything else, like these people are fighting and the communities, they're coming together and they're rising up to say, this is what we want or what we don't want. But at some point, there is a tipping point where that may or may not necessarily work because there's always money and finances involved for those who stand to gain. Can you speak to what someone might do to shift the way that they think about their lives today, especially when we talk about that Gen Alpha, Gen Z population, in preparing themselves by way of characteristic and behavior? What might they do to change leading into this newly realized future?
Oh, that's awesome. So I am actually working with a client who is going through this. Actually, she's in a position and in a role where, and she's a senior level.
Mm,
And when I say that, not by title, the way in which she thinks, the way in which she operates, she excels in everything she touches. And her job, they're going towards a lot of things that are AI generated, and eliminations are on the wall, right? The writing's on the wall. And when we talk about cumulative change, she's also
mm,
heading into retirement. And the question is, what can I do? I'm irritated, I'm frustrated. She also knows that the job that they want AI to do will not be the most efficient, but you can't stop it, right? So at
mhm,
the same time, I said, so what part of this can you control? And I said that not as, a lot of times when we ask that question, people think that it's kind of like that you're pushing the responsibility on them and that it's their fault.
mm,
It's not that. We ask that question to get your thinking prompted. It's it's an opening for you to be empowered to start thinking beyond what you've been dealing with day to day. So when
mhm,
she started to think about it, and I said, what skills do you have that it could not do? And she started to name all these skills. And then I started adding skills, and she goes, I never thought about that. I said, a
mhm.
robot can't do that.
Yes.
And maybe they're not able to provide you that position or opportunity, but can you go somewhere else? And can
Mhm,
this somewhere, or can you create it?
mhm,
Are you able to create it? Are you able to do something perhaps on the side that does not conflict with conflict of interest? If you stay with this company and they limit some of your positions, what can you do? Can you even take maybe a different type of role within the organization that still allows you to do this, but gives you the affordability to do something else? I'm saying all of that to say that yes, the technology is necessary, and in a lot of respects, it is efficient. And then in some respects, it is replacing people's jobs when you know good and darn well where else are you going to put these people? And you haven't even done any type of nice transition plan to say, okay, AI may be taking over this, but we're going to offer this to you so you can be stellar in this and you can learn something
mhm,
else. So sadly, but also fortunately, we have to do that for ourselves. Personally, I did it. I
mhm,
saw the writing on the wall working in corporate America for 25 years. And not only were they shifting in a place that wouldn't necessarily need my skills in that capacity, nor were they in alignment with what I really wanted to do. And I said to myself, what can you do? What do you do? And where is your passion? And I created my lane by way of here.
Yeah.
I've even worked with, we talked about those brick and mortar places like Forever 21 is going away. Our favorite store, one of mine, going away, right? What can you do? Those people behind the counter have other skills aside from working at Forever 21. Those skills just so happen to
Hmm.
be at Forever 21. I even
Yeah.
talked to one of my hairstylists who shifts are happening. Shifts happened during COVID. So now how do you shift with the time? What I
Yes.
hear is not inability. What I hear is kind of being stuck as far as how do I shift? How do
That
I
evolution.
shift based off of what I know already? And how do I build up on that or create something new?
My son came to me a couple of days ago and said, "Ma, my manager told me that at one point minimum wage was $3." And I said, "Baby, I made 3.75 an hour." And I was like, we were working full time. And I mean, the check was laughable. I mean, the check probably would cover gas in today's gas tank. But I remember there was a time where we were making 3.75 an hour gas. You could go to the gas tank and say, give me 10 on five, or give me $5 on one, and be all right. And we aren't the ancient of days, folks. We are still fairly young people, and the idea that I lived in an era where, we could catch the bus for 50 cents.
Yeah.
I lived in a time where we could catch it. And I just think about the evolution of time, even in my existence, that I'm not yet 45. And in my existence, like we had a 10-cent transfer and 3.75 gas. And my first apartment was $800.
Yes.
$800 for, I mean, a nice size place. You know, I just, when I think about the young adults that who are watching this also, what would you say to the future of those? Like, we have the current who are shifting out, but the future, they don't necessarily know what it's like, because their existence is still fairly new, coming into adulthood outside of their parents' homes. What message would you deliver to the Gen Z or the Gen Alpha who's just now transitioning middle school and getting ready to go to high school? And I
Oh,
know, right?
this is good. This is good.
Gen,
I would
Gen
say
Alpha is in middle school. Yeah. What
don't
would you
don't
say
go
to
for
them?
what's popular.
Yeah.
I would
Okay.
go for what's needed. You want to always look for something where I know we're not, we won't forever be indispensable.
Mm-hmm.
However, look for roles that you're going to always be needed and look for roles that give you flexibility. And what I mean by that is that whenever you take a role or you create one for yourself or an opportunity, make sure it doesn't put you in a box so that if times do change, you're able to pivot and expand it to something else. So here's an example. So when we were younger, it was get your degree, get you a good job, right? Remember that? That
Oh
was
yeah.
the thing. But now not everybody was taught what degree to get.
Mm-hmm.
So there were
Yeah.
some people that were getting degrees and no shade. Okay, so I don't mean it by any means. Some people would get a degree in something, but then it's like, what are you going to do with it? And then if
Mm-hmm.
something changes with that, what are you going to do with that degree? I'm one of those people, right? That I started off, and God, I love my educators. I love them. I started out in elementary education, but I also knew my father on his deathbed said, "Are you going to make some money out of that?" And he did. He's giving me his rites of passage, and he's also, and I'm being for real with your listeners. And I said, and I started to calculate, and I went to school, student teach, and God bless them. I thank y'all because y'all do an amazing job. But knowing, first of all, my capacity, my patience, yes, I had a desire for kids, but then I also realized, Sharita, I had to be realistic. I don't have a lot of family support.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a single woman. I don't have a lot of, and I also like certain things. And then what else do I really want to do? So I changed my major. And by way of that major, for me, for my design, I'm not saying for everybody else, think about what the design is for you. I
Yeah.
changed that for me, but that major gave me so much flexibility that even when I was working with a company for 25 years, I was doing several different roles, gaining different strengths, right? And then on the side, being able to do my own consulting within reason, right? Within not crossing over ethical boundaries, getting the right approvals and things of that nature. But I was able to do that and ship something that will make you flexible. But read the signs. Read
Yes.
the signs. Not just don't do what is needed, but also that gives you passion, is going to make you happy. But also in that, also create your lanes and make your happiness. You will be surprised that when you get into something and you put your heart into it and your passion into it, sometimes that you can start to create your lane and gain some uncommon favor.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So
That's good.
really, really think about it. That's why I'm so glad my niece is in science and technology. I'm like, yes.
Mhm.
Just she's doing dance and all of that. Don't get me wrong. She's doing dance and art and she's awesome at all of it. But make yourself well-rounded. That's
Yes.
what I would tell the young people. And I would also tell them, they already know this, Sharita. They're smarter than us in a lot of respects, as they should be wiser, right? Because the
Mm-hmm.
next generation should be wiser. They can't depend on us. Sad. They can't depend
Mm-hmm.
on the system, so they have to make their own way.
Yeah.
And we should be helping them to do that by way of our decisions as well. And if the system isn't going to do it, their major system should be doing it for them.
Yeah. Well, look, this was a phenomenal conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed our chat on today. This was part two of grief, loss, and transitions. And Roz, do you have any final words you want to leave our guests with? And also including your final words, ways that we might be able to get in touch with you.
Sure. My final word would always be this, and Sharita knows this. You know this, Sharita. I am not
Mhm.
a religious person. However, I am spiritual, and I believe in divine connections, and I do believe that we are all created in and with the divine energy that I call God. Perhaps your listeners call it something else, or they don't call it anything at all. However, I am saying this to say that we are not as limitless as some of our behaviors may tend to be, or maybe our train of thought may be. And so, what I
Mhm.
want to say is that no matter what it looks like, no matter the chaos around you, your awareness of self, your awareness of who you are, your awareness of the energy in which you bring, and the uniqueness of you makes space for your knowledge and wisdom. And then it makes space for whatever design or whatever plan you're putting together for yourself. You design it. I will always say this, not mama, not daddy, not whomever, not anybody's projections, because sometimes what we've been doing and operating in is off of someone else's limitations.
Mhm.
So define it and design it for yourself. And do not, even when you're scared and it's hard, do not avoid the challenges.
Mm.
Don't avoid, when it comes to grief, loss, and transitions, take a beat because it's a weight, but don't avoid it. I promise you, you will be living the fullness of life. It's like having a slice of pie in front of you and you only take one bite, because that's the limit you put on yourself. But what I'm saying to you is that if you really, really go into this with an awareness and you are like, I'm going to take that whole pie and I'm going to eat that whole pie, or even something healthy, I'm going to eat that whole apple so that it really gives me the fullness that I need. And you're experiencing things to its totality. Your perspective widens, your abilities widen, your network widens, you're expanding to your highest self, and you are truly able to do supernatural things. So I'll say that. And your question of how you can reach me is rrishardprice.com. I'm also on Instagram, Rosalind Price, Facebook, Substack, Blue Sky. You can reach me there. And if you go on the website, it's very comprehensive to the levels of support that I provide, and also the communities that I can build, that I've built, that if you want to join, you are always welcome to do so. So Sharita, it was such a pleasure. Thank you for letting me share your space.
Thank you so much for being here. And until next time, guys, live life to the fullest and lead every moment. Thank you so much, and God bless you all.